record. And welcome to our Happy Melly seminar. This is our September seminar with Ash from Teal Organizations. Hello, Ash.
Hello, how you doing, Sam?
Doing great. And so we have a smaller audience today, but we know a lot of people watch this on the recording. These are for our members only. And the idea of these seminars is to have an intimate question and answer, ask an expert anything that we want, sort of. So whoever's on the call gets to ask you questions. So Dwaraka, you are going to really get a lot of intimate time here with Ash today, which is great.
I wasn't planning on this. I'm actually in open space. So I was just going to listen to this. But
well, you know what you can do is you can also write questions in the chat. Do you see the chat on the bottom of the screen?
Right.
So if you don't want to speak, you can write your question there.
Okay.
All right. So Ash, why don't you just maybe give people just give maybe 15 minutes explanation, but then if people want to interject, then we can. Does that work for you?
Sure. When you say a 15-minute explanation, on what specifically?
Well, I guess on what, we're talking about Teal Organizations, what that means, what it is, the philosophy behind it and why it's important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Please do interject. And Dwaraka, please come. If you've got any comments or questions through the chat window, please feel free to list them down.
All right, we'll do.
So Teal itself. So I came across Teal myself a couple of years ago, and it really resonated with me because I'm very much focused on the organizational culture space. And Teal as I came across it, came from a book called Reinventing Organizations, which was written by Frederick Laloux. And teal itself is a color which represents the predominant state of consciousness within an organization. So there's been some work done originally through Ken Wilber and Spiral Dynamics around color banding organizations into how they think. So the typical organization that we see with the mechanical type of structure where we look at the corporation as a machine and people as cogs in the machine, that's color banded as orange, and that's very much the predominant type of business we see today. Beyond orange is green, and that's more the kind of family orientated organizations. That's your Ben and Jerry's, your Southwest Airlines. And then beyond that, we've got teal, and teal is just emerging at the moment. We still don't truly understand what teal is. But the qualities of teal organizations are self-management. So it's about how do we actually push authority down to the people so that they can actually start to make the decisions they need to. Wholeness, and that's very much about how we show up at work and how we're allowed to show up and encouraged to show up at work. So typically organizations, especially with the orange paradigm, they encourage us to show up with our logical, rational brains. And that's great, we need that. But we're not encouraged to show our emotions and our sensitivities and what makes us human and what makes us real. So we operate in these environments, these machine-like environments with only the logical, rational side of our brain. And then that doesn't allow us to express ourselves fully, which doesn't then motivate us in any way. And then the third one is about purposeful organizations. So organizations beyond the mission statement, beyond the be best in class type things, which aren't really tangible and not really meaningful to most people. And it's very much about true purpose. So one of the purposes I love, which is actually referred to in Reinventing Organizations, is by an organization called Buurtzorg, which is a nursing care organization in the Netherlands. And Buurtzorg's purpose is that everybody deserves excellent home care, health care in the home. And because this is what I describe as a noble purpose, so it's beyond even the boundaries of Buurtzorg themselves, that it transcends into society. So to fulfill his purpose, the CEO of Buurtzorg, Jos de Blok, he actually gives free seminars to Buurtzorg's competitors to show them how to implement the Buurtzorg model and effectively take market share away from Buurtzorg. Because as far as he's concerned, as long as the purpose is being fulfilled, he doesn't care who's fulfilling it. It's in service of customers. So this is very much all, the constructs of what the Teal way of working is, which for me resonates very deeply on the cultural side, because my focus on culture came after being working extensively in the agile space, so introducing agile ways of working into organizations. So I've been doing that for 17 years now. And when I first started, it was all very much about team focused, saying, hey, let's make this team more effective by using agile ways of working. And what I found out very quickly was that I could construct a really high-performing team, but the biggest barrier to that team's continuous performance and continuous growth in this high-performing journey was the organization itself and the policies they have in place that don't allow the team to actually, don't empower the team to make the decisions that they need to carry on performing. So I thought maybe it's I'm operating at the wrong level here and I need to move more into a program level. So I moved more into program level, creating really effective programs. And the same thing was happening. The boundaries were the organization themselves. So then moving further and further up the scale, who I talk to, very much kind of spending the next 5-6 years talking to board levels and C-levels and then designing the strategy for these rollouts, I could still see that they wouldn't actually deliver the value they needed to. And I'm hugely value driven. If I don't feel I'm delivering value, I actually get upset, and it doesn't make me feel good about my work in any way. So I'd spent some time introspecting, and I was like, is it me? Am I doing this wrong? This may be a part of that. So I was like, well, what is this? Why are these great ways of working, which I know to be effective, not being effective? And if you look at agile programs around the world and kind of go beyond the gloss of the magazine and the stats, you'll see that most of them, pretty much all of them, are actually collapsing and don't provide the value they're supposed to in any way whatsoever. Like one bank I was working for recently, this was their 5th time at trying to do an agile program in the last 8 years. And each time it failed, and the one I was just a part of also failed as well. So looking at why all this wastage is going on and how to stop it, what I realized was that if you look at the organization as an organism, a living organism, just like any other living organism, it tries to protect itself. So when change is applied to it, the current way of thinking and the current way of working is so deep-rooted that it acts against it. So any change that's applied, agile or otherwise, what happens is the corporate antibodies that try to protect the existing system come out to go and attack the change that's happening. And because of that, that's why all of these change programs fell. And that's when I got the realization that actually I need to focus on culture, because no matter what type of change we implement into the organization, it's more than likely going to fail because the culture isn't there to accept that change. So that's why addressing positive cultures allows companies to then understand how they need to adapt, and then they welcome change because the change comes from within, not from outside and people like me pushing into it. So I'll pause there and just see if there's anything more you want me to say on any of those bits, or you just want me to keep talking. You're on mute at the moment, Dan. Cool.
No, it's Dwaraka, do you have anything? Just because I've had the pleasure of speaking with Ash on a podcast, so I've been able to bombard him with questions previously. And so I usually let our community ask. So not to put you on the spot, but is there anything? Oh, so wait, you just wrote, I've thought a lot about this actually. In my own company, but they want to go agile, but.
And the buts all capitalized.
then the top level still wants project timelines. When you finish typing to archive, just press finish so we don't read the whole thing. Penalize your deadlines.
Okay. Is there? Oh, there we go.
So I'll read it for people who might not be able to see this. And then Ash, you can address it. I've thought a lot about this actually in my own company. They want to go agile, but then the top level still wants project timelines and penalize you for not meeting the deadlines. So it's demoralizing when you want to implement agile, but what makes it successful is actually not supported.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your observations and then your point there that you've made, Dwaraka. So there's many myths about agile ways of working, and those myths that apply are propagated by people whose interested is to keep those myths alive. So around timelines. We can work perfectly well with timelines. There's many time-sensitive pieces of work. So, for instance, you've got a new product and it needs to come out in time for Christmas, and that's a very fixed timeline that we've got. We have a concept called the cost of delay. That if you got this product out in time for Christmas, you may earn $20-30 million from it. If you get it out the day after Christmas, you may earn $2 or $3 from it. Yeah. So timelines are absolutely fine to work with. However, what the problem is, I think that you're experiencing there, Dwaraka, is that the company asks for things that they don't necessarily have a hard timeline on. They just want an estimate for this piece of work so we can then set the timeline and set the expectations going forward, when it's actually kind of a bit backwards when we approach things in that way. And what we want to do is really figure out, one, are there any real-time constraints? So let's actually bring those to make those visible and understand what happens if we don't meet those time constraints, so that we can be very clear on what things are important and what things aren't important. But then when the companies ask for these deadlines around things and estimations, they then lock them in as these fixed deadlines. And as you say, they penalize you for not being able to meet those. When actually what we want is to really just have a sense of the direction in which we're going, have an idea of how much we hope to gain by delivering this product, delivering this service to market, and then based upon that, understand how much we want to spend to bring this benefit to market. Once we understand all of those elements, then it's about doing what we call emergent design, or sense and respond. So we still want to head in the direction that we want to, but if any typical project in an organization is 12 months at least, the world changes around us, especially in today's markets. They're moving so fast that you can't really plan in such large chunks. So we want to set these goals and these horizons, but we want to stay very flexible within those goals and those horizons. But because we are asked to define everything up front in terms of the milestones of what we want to achieve, and if you're not working in an agile way, you may have been asked to define all of the requirements up front as well. Those are the things that are then signed off, and they become the contracts. So regardless of how valuable they remain based on the changing circumstances and the context of the piece of work, regardless of the value, they're seen as a contract that you said you were going to deliver this stuff, and I still want this stuff delivered in this timeline, when actually the conversation should always be about what are we sensing out there from the market based upon what our people who interact with the market are saying and what our competitors are doing. And based upon that, we want to be able to flex and adapt what we're planning to do to meet those goals. So what we want to fix, we can fix the timelines, but we want to fix what the goals are and the benefits that we're trying to achieve. The solutions, there's many of those. So those will adapt, and they should be allowed to adapt as we travel through the process. So just looking back at your question again for a moment. Yeah, so looking at what you're saying about it's demoralizing because, you know, they want you to implement Agile, but what makes it successful is not supported. So the other element to this is actually I've found that most people that buy Agile, you know, the C-level, the directors, the ones that pay for these large change programs, actually don't know why they're buying Agile in the first place. So they don't understand what they're even buying. So what happens is they want to go Agile because they're seeing their competitors are going Agile. They don't understand what it means to go Agile, but they need to keep up. Or they're reading articles in the Harvard Business Review saying, if you're not Agile in the next 2 years, your company's going to die. So they're like, oh my God, give me some of the Agile stuff. But again, they don't understand what it is they're buying. So because of that, they only have the existing ways of working to hold on to. And quite often the C-level and the director level don't go through the level of Agile training and information that the people on the ground do. So there's this massive disconnect from what they're asking you to do and what people like me are showing you how to do to be effective. And then that, as you say, leads to a lot of frustration and demoralization. Is there any follow-up you wanted to add to that, Dwara? Hey, Tony.
Hi, Ash.
Hi, Tony.
Thanks. Feel free to turn your video on, Tony.
Have I not? I'm sorry, I didn't realize
No,
I had it
it's
off.
on. It's no. It was on. It was on.
All right.
I didn't see Tony then. I apologize.
I was hiding, Ash. Now you can see me.
Do you guys know each other?
We do.
Maybe.
Wait, don't you work together?
No.
No.
Well,
Dwar-
Tony's just an awesome friend.
Dwaraka, did you? Because Dwaraka's typing because she there. Agreed. I want to ask whether you have any examples of changing the culture, especially starting with the top level, if you could. I'll have to follow up later. Finish.
Yeah, sure. So I've got plenty of examples of changing the culture. The thing to recognize is that the culture is constantly changing whether you do anything to it or not. It's how much ownership you want to take over that culture and the culture change. So as people enter the organization, as people leave the organization, which is very common, they come in from different cultures and they're going to adapt the culture that exists in the organization at the moment. As we start any change program, as we create a new product, all of these things are constantly adapting the culture. So what it's down to is really for us in the organization to really have a conversation about what kind of culture we would like to have in our organization and start to build up towards that. And that's a conversation that everybody should be a part of. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree and we're going to be in this kind of consensus paralysis where we can't do anything until everybody said, yes, that's exactly the type of culture I want, because you're never going to build it right for everybody. But there's common values, that hold society together, and they can hold these micro societies together within the organizations as well. So, even though we have laws within the organization, within society, and we have rules and regulations within organizations, we still have cultural norms, holding doors open for people, picking a bag up, a heavy bag off somebody who's not so able to carry it up the stairs and helping them do these. These are the types of cultures and societies we want to be a part of. Or there's more rigid cultures, there's North Korea in the news a lot at the moment, right? We don't know enough about their culture, but we do know it's very rigid and we probably don't want to be a part of it. So it's just really about understanding what you want to be a part of. And if your organization doesn't adopt the type of culture you want it to have, there's plenty of other organizations out there as well. And there will be one that does have a type of culture that you want. One final point I'd make on that is that with those cultures, it is a lot down to the C-level and the directorship to actually help us enable the kinds of cultures we want. And one problem is that they're not tied in for long enough at the organization as well. And the way that they're rewarded, and everybody in the organization is rewarded, is based around short-term decision making. So they're rewarded, the decisions they make are to unlock their bonus at the end of this year. So they're not going to make the decisions that take 5+ years to really affect the huge, deep changes that we need to see to completely transform an organization. So a lot of the cultural conversations are just at the surface level and lip service, because they're trying to say the good cultural things to, again, unlock their bonuses. And yes, we did that, but they're not there to follow through on seeing this cultural mission, and it's not a passion of theirs. So changing that, the way people are rewarded, will make a massive impact in the organization.
Hi, Ash. It's a question for Sam, actually, but it's related to what you were just discussing. I'm curious, because I know a bit about Happy Melly, but I don't know the whole history, whether they deliberately designed a culture from the outset, or whether something else was the seed for Happy Melly.
Yeah, nice question, Tony. Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Okay, Doraka, thank you so much for joining. Yeah, we'll you can see the rest of the recording later. But great questions, thank you. I'm not as eloquent as a speaker as Ash is about culture and organization, but from what I know, because I wasn't at the start of Happy Melly, but Happy Melly was started by Jürgen, and the whole idea was that it was an experiment. So that sort of experimental culture is inherent in the organization. This, there's no failure, just try everything, go for it. Also, it takes, after, Managing for Happiness, I don't know if you read his latest book, but the entire philosophy of, remote working, not managing your employees, but creating the atmosphere and the system so that people can thrive. And so that's the essence of Happy Melly. So that culture, I would say that it was very deliberate, if that makes sense. So, the systems where we have peer-to-peer bonus recognition, we all work remotely, everyone chooses how often, your commitment level for the month, nobody's watching your back, no one's micromanaging, there's no boss. It's very much, everyone does their own thing. And that was the outset of the culture. I think it's definitely evolved since it began. Changes have been made. I've been there for a bit more over a year, but I know before that there were changes, and even with me, there have been changes. But yeah, it was definitely started with a very deliberate culture based on what Jürgen's book, Managing for Happiness, is about. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I was just curious, because when Ash speaks, and he knows that I work in a very large global conglomerate, and they've got a culture that's evolved over hundreds of years, it's not going to change dramatically in a hurry. You have to, I think, you have to make small dial adjustments in an organization like that. You can't turn the big cog; it just exhausts you. So you have to turn the little cogs that then create a movement that creates movement in the bigger cog. Whereas with Happy Melly, because it's been founded from the outset with a kind of a behavior and a belief, the way you described it, it's in everyone's interest to keep adapting and evolving. So I sometimes see two different types of organizations, one that are sort of stuck in a plateau and they need the help to get moving again, and others that are just naturally just evolutionary in the way that they see life, really.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that, and you can tell me if I'm right, that maybe newer organizations are more apt to adapting, seeing life in that way. I don't know the organization, Tony, that you work for, but it is an older organization, like it's been around for 100 years, 60 years?
300.
300. Should I know who you work for?
No. It's got its own archivist. It's that older company.
It's an archivist.
Started in a coffee shop in London. I mean, it's really old, but those kind of organizations, it takes them a lot longer to adapt to this, because there's a lot of entrenched beliefs that have been passed on through storytelling, but they're very, very entrenched beliefs. So I'm always fascinated because I haven't worked at many new organizations like Foundation from the start with the kind of beliefs the way you described. So it's always interesting to see how other people experience this stuff. I'm segueing this big time, Ash, so stop me if I start going off on a tangent.
No, this is really, really interesting, Tony. Thank you so much. So in the startup world, right? With we would think, and as you said, Sam, that these newer organizations, it's easier for them to be able to adapt and to create more positive cultures more easily, but actually it's not the case. So there's a startup friend of mine's a COO in New Jersey, and there's only 20 people there, and they already have a hierarchy 4 levels deep. And what happens is that you may start off with the best intentions and have a flat structure, but as soon as you get some funding in from like VCs or somebody, they tell you, oh, you need to make a CEO and you need to hire a CFO and you need to do X, Y, Z. So because of those things, you then start to form this, model, this traditional model. The other thing is that there aren't clear models that exist as alternatives to the existing models in the world, the traditional models. So anybody that wants to follow those new models doesn't have a practice to go on and say, right, let's do this. So naturally, they just gravitate towards the old model and what they've known. So it's not much better in new organizations than it is in traditional organizations. One thing I challenged there, though, Tony, that you said was because they're so old, right? You can't change these things in a hurry, and I think that's completely wrong. I think that's a limiting belief that we have. You can change it. Making one drastic change, like we mentioned about changing how people are rewarded over, say, a 5-year program than a 1-year program, and you've got to see that those bets you made in the year paid off, and you'll get in a few years' time. If you made that one change, people's behavior will adapt overnight. I'm not saying we should do that, but there's ways to shortcut it. It's really about how courageous you want to be as the people who are the decision makers, and what your belief is in yourself. But we can shortcut it and make drastic changes very, very quickly should we want to.
That's a fair comment, actually, because I'd agree there are mechanisms inside an organization that have profound followings just by the very virtue of what they are. So yeah, if you change those suddenly, that's going to create an instant reaction. I guess what I've observed is there's not many courageous leaders who will take a gamble like that without understanding how it would play out. And some of the things you can't predict that. You have to make the change and then respond based on how the organization then appears as itself.
Yeah, and kind of slight segue from organizations, but if we look at what happened in India earlier this year, what happened was overnight, so 8 p.m., the Prime Minister made an announcement that all of the large denominations of bills were now no longer valid currency. So only small denominations were now valid. So all of those large denominations became worthless overnight. So the reason they did that was because they felt they were tackling corruption. And so they didn't give people the chance to trade in those large bills, which is why they made the announcement after the banks had closed. And then, like I said, it took immediate effect. So while that's different to what we're talking about in organizations, the theory is the same. You make such a drastic change. You only need one thing, and it completely can change the system. It just really depends on how brave you want to be about that decision making.
Tony, I'm just wondering, when you talk about these changes that the organization would make, I'm sure there's lots, but just to get tangible, is there anything specific that you're thinking of in terms of this would take a lot to change?
So so knowing the area that Ash and I connect around, which is Teal Organizations. So I work in a heavily orange organization, which is incredibly results driven. So its core is about results. It has a strong shareholder influence. So actually trying to disconnect that is really, really hard, because that's part of the reason, the purpose the organization sees itself existing and also identifies itself in that way. So I suppose a tangible example is, would an organization that's rooted in that kind of behavioral pattern be willing to break it to try and break away from the pack? So if, say you're in an insurance company, for example, and there's all the other insurance companies, if you were to break that cycle, and the example I would give would be the mobile phone industry. A tangible example I have there is there used to be 12-month renewals on phones, and then one of the mobile companies decided to go 18 months. They did it just to break cycle with everyone else. So it's the same thing with these big financial institutions. Are they willing to take that risk of breaking cycle, breaking step with everyone else, on the opportunity that the culture that they create is a massive competitive advantage, so they can still get results. However, it's not competitive in the traditional sense of the word. But it takes a huge belief in a leader who's overseeing an organization that size, who's accountable to shareholders, to say, I'm going to take all your money and I'm now going to bet it on black rather than red, because that's the way the message would go back. So that's my tangible example, is how does a big CEO, to use the expression, in a large organization take those kind of seismic shifts that are sometimes necessary, as Ash has put really, really well, actually.
Yeah, so it's the ostrich problem, right? So what happens is organizations have got their heads buried in the sand, and they're ignoring all of the stuff that doesn't work. So it doesn't take us very long to come up with a bunch of examples in any organization to show how the current system isn't working. So for a CEO to make that big decision and say, I'm going to bet on black rather than red, all they really have to say is, well, we've been betting on red for the last 299 years, and yeah, we're doing well. We made some money, but what's happening? And especially if we look at the last 5 years, right? Markets in whatever industry you're in have gone crazy. What they're doing is not working. Anybody who's making money largely is doing it just out of luck and through the grace of God, right? You're going down because the world's changing, technology is becoming more accessible. People who have a fraction of your resources are going to take you out. And we need to adapt. Otherwise, what we're doing cannot last forever. So that CEO, they really just have to look within, take their head out the sand, and show what's been happening in recent times and all that waste in their organization. Probably it would have to be a new CEO, because a CEO that's been there for a number of years will then have to admit that all that waste in the organization is largely their fault, and they allowed that to happen. And again, that's not in people's interest to make those kinds of admissions.
Ashley, just want to respect your time, because we said 45 minutes, so about 5 more minutes. Tony, you're our guest of honor. Is there one last question that you have, or anything else that you want to say?
So I've got one last question, and it's a prediction, really. I'm interested in both of you, actually, in what will be the average age of organizations going forth from this point in the future. How old will organizations get? So I've talked about a really old organization. What do we think the average organization's 10 years now going to be here on?
Good question.
You go first, Sam.
because you actually know what you're talking about, and I'm just like, I don't know.
You're very modest.
When you said that, I thought of Facebook for some reason, and just thought, how long? I mean, they've already been around 10 years or more than that. And then I was thinking, okay, well, how much longer do I see them being around for? I don't know. I would. Part of me wants to say like 15 years, and part of me wants to say 60 years. Can I have that between 15 and 60? It's
a prediction, so I mean they're all wrong, aren't they? just interesting where you think they
are. So these stats are completely wrong, but they're kind of right. I remember reading a while ago saying something like, if you look at the Fortune 500, at the moment, and then you look at it from 50 years ago, something like only 5% of the companies that are on there that were there 50 years ago even exist today. Like I said, those numbers are wrong, but the essence was right there. But to answer your question directly, Tony, I think, and I'm now projecting forward like more than 10 years, maybe in about 20 years time, but maybe 10, right? I think the average age of the organization will be somewhere between about 6 and 9 months. Yep. So the reason I believe that is because we won't have organizations anymore in the sense that we have organizations. You'll have like a mission, a purpose, and you'll have bands that will come together of cross-functional teams that will pitch on pieces of work that need to be done. So they will form and then they will dissolve. So you may have an organization in the top level that maybe hangs all of these bands of people together, but otherwise the actual organizational delivery capability will be very much fluid, and it will come together and release, come together and release. There won't be any more big projects. Projects themselves will last only a few months as we put a few experiments together, we see what was achieved. Technology will of course help us accelerate how quickly we can bring things to market. But yeah, that's my prediction, about 9 months. What about you, Tony?
But so what about Facebook? I'm so confused.
So I really like the Facebook quote because I always do little experiments. I ask certain questions across a bunch of people to find out what their answers are. I also look at people's mobile phone screens because someone showed me once about the generational change. Facebook doesn't appear on a certain generation of children's phones now, and you just wonder whether their time is locked in a certain demographic and it's floating, and they're going to become disrupted. So do they have to reinvent themselves at some point to be relevant, or will their time pass and they've served their purpose for that generation and on with the new? So I was always waiting for Ash to come up with his quote because I knew there was going to be something in there that was going to make me think. Yeah, and I generally do think it's going to get shorter. I didn't think 6 to 9 months, but that's now got me thinking differently.
So I captured what you said right, Tony. Did you say Facebook are a bunch of floaters?
They're not on the call. This isn't going public, is it, Sam?
No, this is for our members only who are really good. We're all on the same page.
With the whole idea about what you're saying about this certain generation just don't have it on their phones anymore. It's a really interesting insight. Thanks for sharing that, Tony. And I think that if you take that kind of that sort of dark thought that effectively as soon as you're born you're dead or you're dying, right? From the moment you're born, you're dying, and apply that to organizations, it's really about how they continue to stay alive. So the moment they start selling their first thing, they're now dying. So they have to keep alive. And that's what organizations need to focus on. How do we stay alive? Because currently we're dying.
Well, on that uplifting note.
Sorry. Sam, you asked for a final question.
No, this has been such an interesting chat. Thank you guys. It's been fabulous. And I'm going to put it in the community and then tell people to actually comment on it after they've watched it and get people's, answers to that question too, because that really did make me think.
And Sam, just to let you know that Tony was actually the person I was referring to at the beginning, who was just as excited to hear the podcast with me on it as you on it. So I think Tony's dialed in to meet you as much as me. But thank you so much for joining, Tony.
No problem at all. I'm sorry I'm late.
No, it's my fault. I've learned a valuable lesson today about CET and CEST. So. Yes.
It's all about learning. That's how we all improve.
It's true. See, that's the whole thing, experimentation. All right, guys. Well, thank you for everyone who's watching the recording. If you want to be part of these seminars, join Happy Melly, join our seminars. They're every month. And yes, ta-ta for now.